Okay, we're ready to get started. I've got my really big round brush here that holds tons and tons of water. I just got that one on Amazon. And we're going to start by just putting some water on the page. We're going to work wet on wet. So I'm just kind of vaguely putting flower shapes on here. You know, nothing exact, just kind of guessing where I want my flowers to be. So I kind of divided the page up into thirds, and I'm going on the upper third and the inner third. So if you divided your page into 9 sections, 2 vertical lines, 2 horizontal lines, I'm kind of placing the flowers where those lines connect in the corners. So now I'm just getting out my number 8 round, and I'm using quinacridone gold. And I'm just kind of putting in a little flower shapes. So I'm going in a circle like the petals would naturally wind and wrap around each other. So I'm trying to figure out where I want my center to be, and a couple little shapes around each petal. As I'm thinking about where my petals are, I'm thinking about them wrapping around each other, so kind of overlapping on one side, wrapping all the way around to the next petal. And I'm just dropping in color at this point. You know, I'm going to just start there with the center, little kind of yin-yang shape, and wrapping my petals around there. Now when I put the water on, I left some dry places. So I'm just kind of working with the water and letting it stop where the dry paper starts. And just kind of roughly putting in some shapes, petal shapes, little curves. And maybe we're going to have a little bud up there, or it could end up a rose. I'm thinking a little bud, and I'm just, kind of putting them in there. But the bud got kind of big, but my roses will also grow. So I'll keep that in mind as I'm building petals. Now I'm just taking plain clear water on that big old brush and just kind of making some of the edges disappear by putting water in it and then dragging it out to the dry paper, to the area around the rose. This will also create a background, very subtle, soft background. Of course, the more water you use, the lighter it will be. And I just want to kind of diffuse some of those edges. Not all of them, leaving some white, dry paper there. Just on some of the sides, I'm going to make that edge kind of disappear by putting the water there. And I'm just going to add just a little water and a little bit of paint for some color down here. And I'm trying to think of the composition of my painting. So I've got 3 roses at this point. I still want to put stems and leaves, but I want my roses to look very transparent, very loose, and just not too defined. So now I'm coming in with a pinky coral color, just putting it on the inside of the petals and on the very center. The very center will be darker. And now as this kind of pinky coral is mixing with my quinacridone gold, I'm getting a really pretty peach. You could use even another color here, like rose madder would be really pretty. Just tapping it in, and you can see everything spreading out, and you wonder, how is this ever going to look like a flower? It's just such a mess right now, but it will. We're using the water to create that transparency and that looseness. So I want to end up with a really soft peach flower with some gold undertones. Everything is worked wet on wet, so nothing's dried in between. And you can see wherever I put this paint, though, all that water that we already have on the page all the paint is dispersing into this water except for where there's dry spots. So use those dry spots kind of like a dam, so the water will stop wherever the dry paper is. And that's how you can control it, by taking advantage of dry paper. Now, if you've gone ahead and wetted everything and it's too wet to do this, you can stop and let it dry and then reapply some water and make a second layer. I'm also trying to determine the angle that my roses are facing. I don't really want them to face directly off the edge, because wherever the direction that it's facing is the direction the viewer's eye is going to look. So I don't want it to just go right off the edge of the page. So I'm kind of pointing it upwards by adding just little tiny flowers up here on the top. Not petals, I mean. I'm sorry. Little tiny petals and bigger petals towards the bottom. So now this is kind of taken on its own little shape and is looking off to one side. So I've changed my mind. It's not a bud anymore. It's going to be a rose. Could be a little smaller rose that's just opening. But it kind of told me that my little bud shape kind of disappeared and it kind of opened up into a rose. So I'm just going to go with it. Oftentimes your painting speaks to you. So especially with this loose painting where we don't have a pattern that we're starting out with or a sketch underneath and we're just doing brush strokes, you know, it's going to do its own thing because of the water. So you got to kind of have an open mind and be very intuitive and don't get set on a certain outcome. Just paint and see what outcome happens naturally. So you can see I'm just kind of cupping those petals around and I'm watching what the paint's doing. I'm watching how it dries. You can see that first one we did, how soft and transparent it's starting out to be as it's drying. That's what I'm looking for. I'm going to add more layers to define it a bit. But, you know, wherever you get out of control with your water, go ahead and mop it up with that big, huge round brush there. It's a quill. That's what that's called when they wrap it with the wires like that. So the number is 240, so I'm not really sure different sizes, but it's probably a good 1/2 inch around. It's big. And I'm just taking in some water, softening some of these edges as they're drying. I can see what they want to do. And I'm looking at which direction they're going. So they're all going in kind of a different direction, which I like to do. Now I'm going to take my cat's tongue brush here. I'm thinking about adding some leaves and stems. So I like this brush because of the point. You can make a leaf with it by just putting the point down, press down, lift up, and it makes its own little leaves there. I always like to have a little scrap paper, watercolor paper next to me so I can test things out before I put them on my painting. Or to see how much paint I have in there. Is it the right color? Is it the right consistency? So I'm just kind of adding some water because I'm thinking when I put these stems in, I want them to spread. I'm not ready for the final shape of them. So I'm just going to take my cat's tongue, just the tip of that brush, and I'm thinking about some rose leaves over here. Now roses have 3, 5, or 7 leaves per little cluster. So these are wet on wet, so this is pretty much going to disappear into the background. It's going to diffuse, and I'm not using real strong paint. I'm kind of making a shadow. I can always come back and add more to it, but right now I just kind of like that look that something is in the background. So I'm thinking, you know, just a couple peeking around the roses here, very soft. I tend to add too many leaves, so I'm going to try to use some restraint because I want to leave a little bit of empty space, but the painting is going to tell me what I want it to do. So at this point, I'm just doing everything very soft and letting the paint dry naturally and see what it ends up doing. If you take a blow dryer to it, it won't naturally become something. If you dry it, it's going to just stop in its tracks. But what I want is this wet paper to keep that paint on top moving and just see what happens. I'll get some blooms, I'll get some edges, and that's going to help direct my final painting. So now I'm coming back down around the rose, and I'm thinking to myself, I've already put too many leaves, but I got to balance it out. So I am kind of cupping that pet leaf cluster under the rose, kind of close up to the bloom itself, and then having a few down here that are going to come off of the stems. Everything very soft. Remember, we're going to do more layers, so this isn't the final outcome of these leaves or these roses, so keep on watching. Now I'm just very loosely holding the brush in my hand and just having some angles to it. So my dad taught me how to draw tree branches, and this is the same way. You add some angles, you stop and go, and then wherever you have that stop and go or that angled twist directions, that's where the leaves will go, or other branches would go in the case of a tree. Just makes it easy to kind of visualize. I'm putting a little bit of green leaves where that little cluster of leaves might hold on to the head of the flower, and then it's having a stem too. And I really want to put some angles in there, so I'm going right for it. Starting to see the composition of the painting. So I'm adding more leaves. I want some of these leaves to be shadowy in the background. So I got a little bunch of leaves going off right here. I'm using the tip of that cat's tongue brush. So it's a flat brush, but it's got a point on the end. And that is defining the shape of my leaves for me. I'm just kind of pressing it down. Start off lightly and then push into the whole body of the brush and then lift up, and that'll make that leaf shape. Going wild with the leaves, but now I have to do it because I have to balance the painting, so I'm just kind of putting them on there. Try to leave some white of the paper, or at least some blank area where your eye can rest. Don't want the whole page busy, busy, busy. Some artists do, and that's good. It's whatever you like to do. I'm just telling you what my intention is as I'm painting this. And I'm looking at all of these rose petals and what's happening with, especially that one on the right. That's pretty interesting that it has all those lines of, I forget what they call those, backwash, I think, something like that. That's something else. Anyway, yeah. So anyway, we'll use them to our advantage. So now I'm coming in with my flat brush, and I'm just using it straight up and down. So I'm using the tip of the flat brush to kind of define these petals individually. So I'm wrapping them around each other. So if you ever tried to build a paper rose or did like cake decorating roses, you start with the very center, and that's very tight. So those petals are going to be smaller and tighter and closer together. And then as the rose blooms, those outer petals are more exposed. Those used to be the top petals that wrapped right around the bud, and now they were bigger then because they're the wraparound petals. And so now they are the outside petals of our rose, and they're going to be much bigger than the very center. So as you come around, you can make bigger commas, big like that. And then I'm just taking some water And just using the one side, so this is almost like a negative painting, but I'm just softening one side and I'm leaving the inner side more of a defined, harder edge. Although I don't want it to be super hard because it's supposed to be a curve, so I'm coming back then with just the water and just here and there softening the inner edge. I'm trying not to connect it with the petals inside too much because I want definition between the petals. So I'm making these big long commas, coming back with water, and I'm wiggling my brush to kind of spread it out a little more, get a soft outer edge on my petal. So see, I'm just kind of wrapping it right around. And you can see where the paper was dry and it left some line of definition, and I'm coming back and another layer now and deepening it up. So I'm repeating the process right on top of the previous petals that I painted there. So it's just done in layers, lots of little layers, and you'll know when you're done layering it, whenever it's pleasing to you. I'm just coming back and I'm leaving some space between the petals so it doesn't fill in completely and just have one big blob. If that happened, let it dry, and when you go back and do another layer of petals, make sure that you don't let them all touch, and it'll still turn out nice. So I'm just adding in that kind of coral color. I'm sorry I don't know exactly what color it is. I'm using from a palette that I had first put all my paints in, and then I wrote on the side with a Sharpie, well, what colors they were. And at this point, it's been too many years for some of the colors, and I can't see what they were. Might be alizarin crimson. It's something, just use something a little darker than your outer petals. So this will be the inside and the center, this color. And then the outer petals, of course, had that little bit of quin gold and also water, of course. The water makes it softer and changes the color. So now see here, I did let them touch too much, and the inside of my petal kind of all merged into one. But I'm not worried about it. I can come back and define that a little bit more, doing exactly what we're doing now. So I'm using this flat brush, using that tip of it, and I'm standing up. When I do this, I like to stand up so I can see the whole page. I can see what's happening, how the water's moving, better than if I'm sitting, at the bottom of my painting. So that got really strong there, and I'm thinking, oh boy, did I put it too dark? I don't know, but I can always mop some out. I can always bring that paint out to the edges with just plain water and soften it that way. So this rose is growing and growing, and I'm a little out of control. So I'm going to take my toilet paper. This is a single ply Scott 1000, and I'm just going to lay it on top, gently touch it, and lift up some of that paint. Clean up my edges and then blot some, and I'm going to go over it again. So just to get some control over that water. So now I just got water in my brush, and I'm softening out the marks that were made by putting the toilet tissue on top. And sometimes I like the marks that it makes, so I'm just going to leave some highlighted areas here and see what happens. Let that paint move. Now this is Doc P.H. Martin Bleed Proof White. And I just dip my brush in water, then dip it in the jar, and I'm just sprinkling a little bit on there. Hopefully it'll all move around in my paint underneath, and it will give me some of my light back that I lost. You want to do this while the painting is wet or very damp, otherwise it'll just lay right on top of the painting. So you kind of want to be able to move it. So I'll take the water on my brush, just kind of coax it where I want it to go. Lighten up some of the too dark areas. There's always a way to save something. Just gotta know the little tricks. You could do this with gouache also. Or you could do it with watercolor inks. Do it with that. I use that as well. I just like the stock P.H. Martin Bleed Proof White, though, for some reason, because it's, I think, more opaque, and I can move it around with my brush. The only time I come into problems with this is if I want to do ink over the top of the painting. It doesn't want to absorb the same way as just the watercolor paint. It kind of grabs the ink, so I don't use it a lot on paintings that I intend to ink over. I'm just kind of adding in a little bit more just with my brush, just where I want to lighten it up. And I like how soft and kind of fuzzy it looks, cloudy. Almost like if you squinted your eyes and saw something, through a blurred vision. So now I got out my sparkly paints, and in this little set there is a kind of corally, orangey color. So I'm thinking, okay, I can add a little depth with this sparkly paint and define a couple of the edges. I just use water to soften out the inside edge. This is negative painting. So I got enough paint on my brush when I applied that shimmery paint to where it would stand up right off the page. If you don't put enough paint on there, it won't move and it'll just make a stripe. So make sure that you put enough paint when you first start this negative painting technique. Put enough paint on there that you can see it standing right up off the paper, and then you come back with your wet brush and soften one side, and you can keep the other side a hard edge. Now wherever I'm putting this, it's not really metallic. I guess it's a shimmer. It's just really soft. Wherever I'm putting this, it kind of is adding another color, and it's making a shadow. So I'm thinking I'm using it where the shadows are because of the color of it. It's darker. And I'm just very careful. I don't want to put too much of this on. It'll be way distracting because you don't want to just see shimmer. You want to see the painting, and this is just a little jewelry, if you will, that goes on top. Like putting on jewelry. You don't want to put it on your whole body. Just here and there. Necklace, earrings, bracelet. So think of it as jewelry, and you're just adding a little something. And, you can stop and move on to the next flower. Everything is still damp, so all of this will move around. You can see the shine of the water. That's because I have enough paint and water into that. Stands right up. See how it's lifted up the page. And put some in those shadow areas to find that petal underneath here. So I'm doing it very loosely. I don't want it to be too technical for this painting. This painting is loose, intuitive. Just doing what you feel at the time. So everybody's will turn out different, which is the beauty of it. And I really like the depth it's putting in there without adding, you think shadows, you think gray or, a soft gray purple. But this is just more of the same tones that are in my rose. And I'm liking that. So I got those same tones in there. And not exactly the same color, but the same tone. I'm just kind of watching where I place this and trying to keep in mind not to go overboard. Easy to do. Leave some of those beautiful colors and the natural beauty of what the paint did itself. I'm trying not to cover it all up, but just kind of bring it out. Do a few little edges, then make the rest of it very soft. Sometimes this technique takes a few times to practice, but it's great because you really can get the feel of what the water is doing on the paper and how much water you need to put in your paint. Sometimes you don't need too much water in there. And sometimes we're just mad with the water, so this is all still wet, so I'm coming back and it's still moving. There's a lot of water that's ended up in my paper. So if I took this off of the board right now, you would see the back side is wet. So as long as it's wet, that paint is still moving even on the top side. I'm just coming back and adding a little more. I'm leaving it lighter on the top, as if the sun was shining on it there, and leaving it lighter as those petals curve back towards the sun. I want to define that center. And I'm kind of going with what the paint underneath kind of was drying as. It gave me a line, a little kind of like a bloom. And I don't mind blooms. Leave my edge a little bit not so defined in some areas, and kind of rubbing it out a little bit. I'll go up here before this one dries too much. In some places it has dried, but that's okay. I can just add my water and move that paint. If it dried too much, it'll just be more defined, but you can still do the technique. You just might have to work on it a little bit. But I love how they're really starting to take shape. They don't look flat. They look like they have some depth, that those petals are inside and wrapping out to the outside, wrapping around the flower. Pretty happy with that, how it's looking. I'm going to let it dry, and then that'll tell me if I need to do anything more to it. Of course, you can't help but put a few more extra strokes on there. Need it or not. I've always got to keep messing with it. You got to really be careful not to overwork it, or you're just going to have one big massive blob of paint there. So I added a little bit of water just to see what it'll do, kind of make a bloom, define that edge in its own way, because a lot of times when you do that, it'll make like a irregular edge, make it soft, kind of lacy. And I'm just moving some of these edges around by adding the water and just seeing what it's going to do. Got to watch it while it dries. If it does get a little out of control for you, you can just take your damp brush, dry it off really good, and then start moving the paint before it dries and coaxing it in the direction you want it to go. So I'm just coming around now, and what I'm doing, just taking water, closing in some of the white gaps with just water, so it'll move the paint that's already on the paper. Just a few places, because if they're too white, I don't want that to stand out. Okay, so here we go. This is what it looks like after it dried. You can see some of the blooms in there. See right there? I'll give you a close-up look. But it's kind of pretty. It looks like a petal. Looks like a lacy, irregular edge. I like that. I like the one over here. So I want to keep those in my painting, but I might need to do something to connect it all. And you can see that little spot just got white. There's nothing there. So now I got to think about how to add something in there. But first I'm going to define some of these edges. I'm doing that negative painting. That paint is standing straight up off of the paper. I'm coming in with my wet brush and just using it to paint now on the inside. It doesn't have to always be negative painting to make a hard edge on the inside and a soft edge on the outside. Now I'm doing the opposite. I'm doing a soft edge on the inside. And I'm not doing the whole petal. I'm just doing a piece of it. And then I see one here. So you can look at what the paint did, and you naturally will have your answer, or you can make it up. So this, I just think, needed to have a little bit maybe over here. Kind of define a petal. So I'm thinking of the outer petal that wrap around my rose are bigger. So I'm just going to define a little bit of the edge. I don't have to wrap it all the way around. I'm just taking water. Water on my number 8 round. You can use whatever brush is comfortable for you. You could even use a flat brush to do this. I want those edges to match my blooms, so I'm making them kind of irregular. You know, to look like it kind of happened with the bloom. But I like that, how that edge turned out there. I'm just adding a little color into this petal. Just a little bit. And then the center of my rose and these petals, they kind of all filled in together. So now it's dry now, but I can come back and do a little bit of that negative painting and just have a hard edge and a soft edge, bringing it out into a petal. So I'm following my original intent, even though it did its own thing. I'm going back over it and saying, nope, I want you to do this, okay? So I talk to my paintings. I don't know if I'm insane yet, so could be. Oh, well, don't mind me. Alright, so now that inside one, I don't want it to touch where that water is right there. Otherwise, it'll just all form into one massive blob again. So careful not to touch that, or I could let it dry and then come back. I'm too impatient to do that, so living on the edge. And then the very, very center, let's put another little curved comma, have it wrap around, as those petals on the inside are wrapped very tightly at first. And gotta know when to stop, so let's just let that do its thing, and maybe define a little bit of an edge wrapping around those center petals. And just kind of take the tip of my brush and a little bit of water, trying not to bump into where I've already just painted, and just letting that edge soften out. And I just wanted that to be very soft, so I just put that in, put water right on top of it, and let it bleed. Let's see what happens. Bleed into the rest of it. Because I don't want it too spirally. I want it still to look soft, so I'm going to kind of just have a very light touch. I want to define this little petal's edge slightly. And this is where you can get a lot of stripes and too dark and too hard of edges. So I'm sitting now and I'm doing this, but I got to stand up and take a look at it and see if it's too definite where I'm putting these lines. I might have to soften them out a little bit. Best to do that while it's wet. So far I'm pretty happy with it. I wouldn't want to go any darker, not at all with this negative painting. I want to keep it in the same family as the rest of the rose. I want it all to be united and not stand out too much on its own. So I'm going to complete the rose before I make the decision if I need to put a little water on some of those edges and blend them out. So far I like it. So you can see I'm just doing a little bit here, a little bit there. I'm not getting too, just a tap here, a tap there. See what it does. Add another tap where you need it. Thinking I want that center a little darker, and I like the color that shimmery watercolor paint did, so I'm using it more for color than shimmery effect at this point. But I still have to be very careful that I don't cover the whole rose with shimmers, or it'll look really funny when you're passing it by at different angles. That shimmer picks up the light, so you want that to work for you as a highlight rather than the whole rose being a big sparkly shimmer on from one angle. When the sun's shining on it, you want it to all look still like a rose. So just keeping that in mind. coming back with my wet brush and just softening one side. Diffusing that inner edge, leaving the outer edge harder, and then trying to put that shadow in it. I'm coming and mopping it out. Rinsed out my brush, dried it off, and just mopping up some of that paint. See that? Just mop it up, wipe it on your towel. Rinse it off, dry it off, use that brush to just mop it up. So what I'm trying to do is dark on the inside where it would curve down towards the center of the blossom, and leaving that defined edge on the outside, but I want where it curved to be light. So that's why I mopped it out in the center. And the paint's still moving. There's still a lot of moisture in there. So I'm adding a little depth, and I'm using that corally paint, not the metallic paint. And defining that tight petals in the center. A little bit here, a little bit there. So it's just a little dabble do ya at this point. Just do just a teeny bit and stop, look at it, see how the paint's moving. Go somewhere else, but just keep watching what it's doing. You might need to come back and correct something if it's getting out of control. You might need to put a little bit more of that toilet tissue on it to mop it up. If you get a big puddle and it's going to move all the paint, go ahead and mop it up. But we're just, see, I want to soften that transition there. So I'm coming in just with that damp brush. I'm wiping all the paint off on my little towel there, paper towel in my hand. And now let's move up here while we'll watch and see what happens to the ones that we previously painted. But let's make them all look like they belong together. I could have some soft and undefined in the background. That would be beautiful. But these are three main focal roses. So I've got three roses that I want to look like they're almost like a little bouquet. Like some roses we just picked and put on top of each other, held them in our hand. See what they look like. That's the best in the garden. You go pick your flowers that you've grown, and I would only do it to my mature plants that had tons and tons of flowers, so I didn't pick them all off, but I love to bring them inside, and they smell so beautiful. I love to garden, love to grow flowers. Always have. My mom had a little greenhouse in our backyard, and she planted gorgeous flower beds. And, you know, my mom taught me a lot about growing things, and we had fun together going to all of the nurseries and buying plants and flowers and bushes, berries, blackberries, raspberries. We grew strawberries. We had vegetables. We canned stuff together. That was always fun. Eventually, it was not economical really to can things because of the jars that cost so much, and you always got to save your jars, but you know, it got kind of expensive, but the results were so much better than the store-bought that, you know, we still did it. Good old days, long gone now, but cherish my memories. So I'm just doing the same thing on this top rose as I did on the other two. And you can see how much lighter it's drying. See those roses underneath, how much lighter it dries. So you gotta keep that in mind because they're drying. I'm working on this rose, but as I'm doing it, it all appears darker, but it will dry lighter. So you gotta keep that in mind. I don't know what I'm doing with this edge up here. I'm kind of thinking, oh, I liked it better how it was. But I can blot it up a little, get some of that paint off of there. Add a little definition right there in the inside of that petal. I'm thinking I liked it how it was. I'm just going to soften that just a bit more there on that top edge. And you can see how these roses grow. I mean, as you're painting the petals, it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So when you first start out, You know, I had to keep that in mind, that it's going to grow big and they're all going to merge together and be, you know, bigger blossoms as I paint these petals and the water flows. And adding some more water over here, soften that edge if it's not too late. Kind of scrubbing it. See how I'm scrubbing it and then scrubbing some of that paint. It didn't do too much, but it softened it a little bit. And I need to define this a little tiny bit. And you see I did paint that leaf under there, but I'm going right on top of it. You're going to see a little bit of that green color under it, and I like that. So these layers are so soft, so watery, that all the colors that are underneath will show. That's the beauty of watercolor. And just add a little bit on that tip. And now I feel like I gotta balance it out. Even though I liked my little watermarks there, I feel like I gotta balance a little bit. So I'm going ahead and adding a little bit here to this outside, give it a little better shape. Just using my damp brush to smooth out that paint. And I think it needs a little defining up here. And what about, do I need to cover up my pretty edge there? I'll blot up some of that. Get it back to going a little softer. Evening it out a little bit. As you get the marks from the toilet paper there. And coming back because I pretty much lifted off all of my shimmery paint. So I'm going to put a little bit more on. Now I'm telling myself you have to use a lot of restraint here. Lots of restraint. Don't do too much at one time. Build it slowly. Maybe put some little more depth right there. I love this color of this paint because it is shimmery, but it's also a great shadow color. So wherever there would be darker moments, darker shadows, I'm putting a little bit of that. Just a little. Like I said, I've got to use restraint. I can't emphasize that enough because it'll look garish if you put too much. So there's pearl paint, there's metallic, there's glitter. This is metallic. But it doesn't look metallic like chrome. You know, it's soft. And this was a set given to me from one of the nice ladies that took my class, and she had bought several sets because they had different color in some of them, but some of them had the same colors. So she had bought 2 identical sets, and she was so nice to gift me one of the sets. So now I'm kind of hooked on these paints. So yeah, I kind of go in spurts, you know, where I love something and I'll use it, and then I'll find something else I love and change, and I'll use that. So right now I'm using these in a lot of my paintings. I've been doing a lot of loose florals, and I'm loving just adding this little bit, just a touch of this metallic paint. Okay, so now it's dry, and I am setting up my phone on the side here, and I have a picture of a rose, and I just want to make sure that my roses look like a real rose. So I just have a photograph on my phone of a red rose. It has nothing to do with this, you know, composition or anything. It's totally different. It's just a single rose, but I often do that just so that I can make sure I'm kind of getting it right, you know, so that it looks good. Sometimes you can't work totally off of your memory. Sometimes you can. So this is a combination of both, because I've grown all kinds of roses, and my mom did too. She had like a ring of roses with a fountain in the middle, and she had many flower beds that were full of all different roses, and then she'd plant smaller annuals in front of them all, and it was beautiful. Now I live in Florida, and I have not figured out how to grow flowers, and they don't have the same kind of nurseries as they do up in Michigan. A lot of things are trees up here, you know, or I see like shrubs and things that have beautiful flowers, hibiscus and bougainvillea and birds of paradise and things that are more, landscape statements rather than little flowers. I think it's too hot, and the ground gets really hot here in the summer, and it kills a lot of things. So I know it's doable. I just don't know how to yet. So I'm kind of looking at it now. Okay. I think my roses are done. So let's work on the stems and leaves. And I got my round brush, and I got me some of my green Apatite Genuine. So it has like the pigments in there, the genuine pigments. And I'm coming in kind of dark, because I will be adding a little bit of that shimmer and maybe a little bit of that, those little leaves that hold the bud on there might be out here, but then I'm thinking about it, the center of the rose is way up high and it's probably not visible. It's probably blocked by the whole rosebud there. So I'm going to come back now, and I have another metallic kind of gold green here, antique kind of color, and I'm just going to drop some in. And I put them there so they're going to stay. And I'm just dropping in a little bit along my stem. And I love the color that it makes. Those two colors, that kind of green antique gold with that green Apatite Genuine, is really pretty color mixed together. And I don't know if you can see it or not, but it kind of dispersed some of that green underneath. So now this rose is connected somehow, and the shape's kind of going upward. So I'm going to add just a little bit of a stem, a little bit of those little side leaves, even though you probably couldn't see them. So, looking back, I might not put those there, but I don't hate it. So I'm just going to leave it. Otherwise, I could blot it up with my toilet tissue as it's wet, and I might have a little shadow of it underneath, but it wouldn't be so definite. But I'm not positive I hate it, so I'm just leaving it. I'm going to add probably some more leaves, and because I got that white area, it's going to need some green underneath that. In the center of the two bottom roses, it's kind of too white. I got to add something in there. Same thing, softening up by dropping in some of that metallic antique green. And I'm just kind of moving it around a little bit. Want it to look like it's connected to something. And then here's my third stem. So I'm just kind of following that shape that I did initially. And I put that little, I'm going to put a leaf off of that little bend there. Going back into that antique gold, and this one I decided not to put those little leaves. Let's see how that looks. Those little leaves that would connect the blossom to the stem. I really need to find out what those are called. And now I'm just taking that metallic and the green that's on my brush and just putting in some little starts of, the branch of the leaf where I want them. I want one there too. Sometimes they grow off like kind of in a little grouping, little cluster. And where I already have some of those shadow leaves there, I'm just going to make them darker. Make them not a shadow anymore. I'm going to go ahead and make leaves out of them. As you're painting, you do things, and it tells you what you like and what you don't like for your next painting. So, things don't turn out kind of how I wanted them to. It's not a big deal, not at all. adding leaves, make it doing the same way, putting the point of the brush in there, pushing down and bringing it up. If they're a little shaggy, that's good because rose leaves are a little shaggy on the outsides. You don't even have to have definite leaves that belong to a rose bush. You could just put background leaves in there because the roses are growing amongst other things most likely, so you could do it that way if you want. I'm trying to make them a little shaggy. I chose this color, green. It's kind of brownish, it's kind of earthy. I think it goes well with the peach. Could have used like a sap green and, put that in there. So if I had like a pink rose, I think that color, sap green, would be pretty with it. So just put a few little dabs on the side, see if you like them. This also has a lot of pigment, like kind of granular grain into it as it settles down into the paper. So I'm dipping into a little bit of sepia also. You can see the difference there, some of the green, some of the sepia. That's more green up there. And I'm putting them up in the corner, trying not to direct them to the point of the corner. So I'm trying to go to, the flatter side of the paper, not into the point. I don't know, it just bugs me when things are right into the corners. I want to make your eye keep moving. I don't want it to stop and look right there in that corner like a big arrow or something. So it's going towards the top, but I'm not sticking the point right in the corner. And up here I'm using a little bit of sepia on my brush. I have the green and the sepia. And I had those little shadow leaves down here, so I'm adding some leaves. And as soon as I did that, I thought, oh, too many leaves. Did my classic Barb move there. And overdo it. Less is more. It's hard to remember less is more, because especially you enjoy painting, so you just want to keep painting. And I'm trying to kind of go around those little connecting petals. I kind of put some leaves around there so they don't show up so definitely. And now I'm just taking that same antique goldy green, putting some lines in my leaves. Not too many, and you don't have to do every single leaf. Just put a little bit of lines just to bring shimmer throughout the painting. And I'm using it to connect the leaves to the stem. See, like right here. And I'm using a long liner brush or a rigger. You could use a finer brush. I like the long bristles with it. It gives it a little bit more flow, little movement. I can turn it, and I like the rigger for this. And just a few of these little marks. Now these ones have dried, and it's showing up even more on down here. And I'm telling myself to leave some unpainted, but I don't know. I keep going. Yeah, it'd be nice if I could have some control and leave some unpainted. It's still pretty. So now that I've, painted every single one on the other side, I'm going to go ahead and go for it. Just make it all uniform. Make it so that the whole thing looks intentional. If you like my videos and if you're learning something from them, I'd appreciate your help. And if you haven't subscribed already, If you'd like to subscribe, that helps me grow my YouTube channel. Also, every time you hit that like button, helps me. And if you want to know when I put out a new video, hit the notifications, and that'll remind you that a new video just came out. I do Mix It Up Monday, every Monday, where I'm mixing up some colors randomly out of my pile of paint and seeing what happens with them. And then I'm trying to put out a tutorial video once a week. Sometimes it's 10 days. Like over the holidays, it was a couple weeks. I was traveling, so it's not every week, but I'm working on getting more consistent with my release of my videos as well. So I appreciate that very, very much. So with YouTube, you have little goals that you need to make in order to get to different levels. So I'm still at trying to get my first goal. Almost done painting all these leaves in. Putting the jewelry on my painting. Okay. Put them away. Close them up. Stop, Barb, stop. Okay. So yeah, a little bit too many leaves, but now since I don't need that to move or anything, I'm just going to go with my blow dryer and dry everything really well. So I'm just using it on low, high heat, and I'm holding it away from the paper a bit so that the paint doesn't move with the motion of the air pushing it away. I wanted a few more of those shadow leaves, so I am using an olive green. It's kind of yellowy, which looks good with the corally roses. I'm just kind of going in and adding even more leaves because I've already got it busy, so I don't know. Putting more leaves. So I'm just using that flat brush, straight up and down, push, set the corner down, push, and then lift up. So I'm just kind of adding a little more towards the top, so hopefully the bottom looks calmer. You can't see because my arm is in the way, and I got old lady arms. I get bruises all the time there. Freckles from Florida. People used to tell me I had alabaster skin. Well, that went out the window. And then just very lightly defining a couple more shadow, just so that it doesn't look like I stopped at the top and didn't incorporate into the rest of the painting. And I keep adding, and I add too many, I have to tell you, I confess. It's very hard for me to have restraint. I just like to paint, so I just keep on painting. But you do whatever you like to do, whatever look you like. And if you don't like your results, just remember we learned something from it. It's practice. Keep on going, keep on going. Oh, can't stop myself. I'm just putting them on there. Why not? I like them. Okay. Maybe I can leave the other corner alone. But now you don't see that white spot so much. See, I didn't go back and add more background paint to that under those two roses in the center. But, I just added some leaves and some shadow leaves, and you don't see that white spot where the water had moved it away. I keep going. And just adding color. Okay, I put my paintbrush down. Now I'm going to sign it. A lot of times I like to use this little old quill, and I just put some paint into the inside of it, and I test it, because a lot of times it'll be too much paint, and it will put a blob on my paper. So I tested on my side paper. It all came out all at once and didn't leave me enough to write, so I just apply it again, shake it off, and up there I got it. Okay, and just sign it. So I like to sign up a stem or alongside of something just to be different. Also, when I mat my painting, I like to put it a little higher, so I definitely have enough room where the signature will still be shown and not covered up by the mat. Okay, I'm trying to show you a little bit of the shimmer here by lifting it up. There you go. You can see kind of the shimmer there, and there's my painting. I'll let it finish drying. Thank you so much for watching my video all the way to the end. Remember, like and subscribe and push that notification button. Until we meet again, peace and love. Bye-bye.